Hello, everybody. Welcome to our second webinar here at World Localization Day. I'm very pleased to see you all here. Jyoti, Michael, Camila, Diego, and all you people that are clicking in here to the webinar. We're all feeling here at Local Futures really happy because it's come off to a good start. And earlier today, we saw that people had tuned in to the program on World Localization Day from 74 different countries. So this was exceeding our expectations, and we've had some very nice feedback, and I'm sure we'll also get criticism, but so far it seems like it has been very well received. So now in a moment, I think when we've got, I think people are coming in, I'll hand over to my colleague Tyley, who will just give a few instructions about here during the webinar, and then we'll launch into some brief introductions from our panelists and speakers here. You might have seen in the World Localization pre-recorded program. And thank you for joining us. I'm Anja Lyngbaek from Local Futures, and I'm in Denmark. Laura, do you want to say a few words about how we do this?
Yeah, sure. I just can see, so there's currently 395 in, but that's going up every second. So hopefully you'll all catch the message by the end of it. But as Anja mentioned, I'm Laura and I work with her at Local Futures. A big thank you for joining us today. And before I start, I'm just going to run through a few admin tasks. So obviously, as there's so many of you, and this is a Q&A webinar, it can be a bit tricky with everyone asking questions. So I'm going to ask you all, if you have a question, to at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a little icon, it's got Q&A. If you could type your questions into there rather than the chat box can be used for sharing links and thoughts and ideas and things. But any questions that you want me to ask the panelists for you, if you could add them into this Q&A box, that would just help me manage all the questions. And we'll try and get through as many as possible. And if you do use the chat box also, just to mention that I think it's automatically set to all panelists, but if you want everyone to see it, you need to change that to all panelists and attendees. One other mention on the questions, if you do put your question in the Q&A box, it would be great if you could put your name and where you're from at the beginning, so I can read that out with your question. And I also just want to take a moment to tell you all about the International Alliance for Localization, which is an alliance that was set up by Local Futures, who are the organisers of World Localization Day. And we are hoping to get everyone who signed up to World Localization Day to also commit to signing up to the IAL, as this is an online platform where we can all stay in touch and carry on these amazing discussions and continue to build a global community that's committed to localization. Once you're a member of the IAL, we have a very active listserv and Facebook group with hundreds of members all over the world, and you'll be invited to join that as soon as you've signed up. So I'll add the link to the sign up form in the chat box where you can see. But I'll hand it back over to Anja.
Thank you. And it's so lovely seeing people from all over the world joining us. This is a very international gathering, as it should be. So do continue to introduce yourself in the chat box and say who you are and where you're from. That's very encouraging. So we'll start here with a brief introduction. Camila, I'm seeing you on the screen. You want to start?
Of me? Yes, of course. Well, I'm Camila from Brazil, but I'm currently speaking from Rome. I've been here since the beginning of the quarantine in Europe. And I'm mostly working on following very closely what kind of political and regulatory proposals are being cooked as the package for rebooting and relaunching global economy after the COVID crisis. I'm kind of skeptical of how forces behind what we would say are the democratic forces or social movements are preparing to kind of hijack this major transition towards interests that are very corporate-led transitions. And I hope we can discuss this as the seminar, as our webinar goes. But I'm mostly interested on how the digital transformation of society is being accelerated due to the COVID crisis and how we can, the democratic and participatory way to challenge this and the pace of this transition.
Thank you, thank you. Michael from the US.
Hi there, everyone. I should say to Anja and others at Local Futures, congratulations on a great day and a great effort. And it's lovely to be here with so many people internationally and my fellow panelists, some of whom I've had a delight in being in conferences with before. And I'll say that as is the case from the film, I am still focused pretty laser-like on two things. One is trying to move money from Wall Street to Main Street in the United States and in other countries. And 2 weeks ago, I just had a book published called Put Your Money Where Your Life Is, which is all about how Americans can use special tax tools for doing local investing. And then I'm also working on developing some webinars for local elected officials with a fellow in Australia named Gilbert Rochecouste. And in about 2 weeks, we're going to start doing these webinars as a way of identifying policies for rebuilding local government around principles of resilience rather than neoliberalism.
Thank you. That sounds very exciting. I think if I can be a fly on the wall, I'll join.
All flies are welcome.
Diego from Spain, Malaga.
Hello, Anja, hello everyone. Congratulations to Anja, to Laura, to Helena, to all the team for organizing the World Localization Day. And I wish everyone enjoy today a World Localization Day and hopefully a World Localization year, why not? I work in the New Economy and Social Innovation Forum, in NESI Forum, and we are working to co-create a new economy that put people and the planet at the center. Because now in the current system, we are not humans, we are human resources, and nature is not nature, is natural resources at the service of the economy, and we think it should be the other way around. And also now with the coronavirus crisis, for example, in Spain and in many other countries, where politicians are talking about rebuilding the economy, rebuilding. So when your house collapses, if you rebuild the same house, probably it's going to collapse again. Today we are collapsing because of pandemic, but could be because of a climate crisis or an energy crisis or a financial crisis or technological crisis. And we think we need to talk about transforming the economy and the way that we are living. And that's the reason that localization for us is really, really important and one of the key elements of a new economy.
Thank you. Well, I think that was kind of the cue also that shifted us into creating this event, thinking this is the opportunity. We do not want to rebuild status quo. We want to transform it. And that is why we are here today. Jyoti from Dorset, UK.
Hello. Hi, I'm a farmer in the UK. I'm here with my 4 daughters and my husband and another family. For 20 years, we've been running a farm. It's an agri-ecological farm, which means we use the land around us to have the resources that we have to produce loads of food on a mixed farm. We have a small dairy herd of goats and cows. We've got vegetables, fruit, and we sell everything locally. And we're part of a cooperative of small farms in the area where we share collective processing facilities, and we get together and we really celebrate the idea that, you know, like lots of small producers in a local area can come together and really create the food that we need for our communities. And that creates bonds that you just, you know, and an identity and a sense of like a local food culture that we just think is very, very special. We're part of La Via Campesina through our union here called the Landworkers Alliance here in the UK. La Via Campesina represents 300 million small-scale farmers across the world who sell through local supply chains, producing 70% of global food security. So we're very proud of our movement of farmers selling locally across the world, providing for the bulk of global food security.
Thank you, Jyoti. Afterwards, I hope we get you get a possibility of telling us all about how the Landworkers Alliance started from a handful of people to a force to be reckoned with at the policy table. So you have we can learn a lot from you about building movements. This is now a chance for you. We want to spend as much time as we can on addressing the questions that all of you out there put to us. So I hope you are writing them down, and Laura is helping here with putting them across to us.
So one very quick one, Jyoti, linking to your introduction, is what's the name of your farm and cooperative? Someone's already asked.
Five Penny Farm is my farm in Dorset. Our cooperative is called the Peasant Evolution Producers Cooperative, because we're very proud to be peasants. We say working on the land, you know, selling locally, providing food for our local community is something that we hold with great dignity and pride, and that we feel that's the evolution for the future. So yeah, that's what they are.
Okay, there's lots of questions coming in. Okay, there's one from Joel. Saying, given that the current economy is driven by legal corporate obligation to reward shareholders, how do we turn off this monster that must continue to create profits?
Michael, you look like you want to say something.
Well, I'll say one thing, and that is there are so many great models available that enable you to tiptoe around the profit model. With cooperative models, with public-private models, or public models, or nonprofits. So I would say, you know, we're entering an era where all of us are being called upon to be great business people in a way, to create the businesses around the values that we believe in. And it sounds like Jyoti's farm is a really good example of an answer to that question as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. We want profit. We want to be an economically viable business, and, you know, and yeah, support our families, and, you know, and be contributing to the wider economy. And, you know, through local food economies, through small scale businesses, you can multiply the number of employees you can have on a small bit of land. You can multiply the number of ways it can be processed, you know, and sold through different, you know, different venues. And if we've got great food here, it can feed into our tourist economy. It can feed into, you know, like our restaurant economy. It can feed into our landscape and the natural wildlife management, all these things, you know, and it just multiplies. And that is economic growth. That's the sort of economic growth we want, one that benefits everybody rather than just a few.
Okay, any more, or shall I get the next questions?
No,
Diego,
maybe
do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd like to ask something, because it's a quite important discussion about what's the role of the goal and the role of the economy, and what's the role of money and profit. And as Christian Felber, that I think today he was participating of Economy for Common Good, says, profit or money is not a goal, it's a means. And that is something that we're confusing in our current system. And I like to compare, as we as human beings, we need to breathe every day. I need to breathe every 10 seconds, 20 seconds, otherwise I will have a problem. So businesses, they need money to exchange products and services, and even some profit to maybe do something different or whatever. But that is not the purpose of any business. I cannot imagine any business that have with the purpose of just making money, because it's something that doesn't provide value, as Michael and Jyoti said. So that's very important to know what is the difference between a means and a goal. And the goal of the economy should be to provide prosperity to everyone and to conserve our planet in the way it is, or even better, and not just making money. That is something we need to change.
Thank you. Laura, what have you got for us?
Okay, we have, I think maybe a few that could be, or a couple that could be combined. So we've got one that links to the previous question from Rita, which is, can we learn more about moving money from Wall Street to Main Street? And there was another question that came after that, was how can we prevent free trade deals from harming small farmers and local economies?
Should we start with you, Michael, with the Wall Street?
So not everyone in every place has the luxury of having significant savings. And so let's just say at the outset that for those people who do have savings, there are ways of managing your money to pull it out of Wall Street and into the things that you love. And one of the things that I've been trying to identify is that there are many ways that you can invest locally and do really well and keep your risk low. One type of local investment that we often forget about is investing in the people around us, the people we love. If you have friends in significant debt, helping to get those friends out of debt at a lower rate actually is an act of local investing. Trying to move, money into building of homes, building of energy efficiency around you, building of interesting government projects, perhaps in stormwater management. All of that is local investment. And then there's investment in all kinds of local businesses. One of the things that I have seen in the United States is that even though we're told that local businesses are a small part of the economy, they in fact are responsible in the United States for 60 to 80% of jobs, depending on how you define local. These businesses are, unless you're talking about startups, the businesses are very competitive, very profitable, although there are many, thousands are under threat because of the COVID downturn. So I feel like people, after having lost their shirts in the United States and Wall Street, the market is now down a little over 10% from its high, and I think it's going to go down significantly lower. Many people are beginning to think seriously about how to invest locally.
Thank you, Michael. Camila or Jyoti, I imagine you might have something you want to say about the so-called free trade.
From the point of the farmers unions, and especially with Lyngbaek Campesina, for years and years, we've been fighting against free trade agreements that often operate to the benefit of transnational corporations, multinational corporations, and were often built on the foundations of colonialism in the very beginning, when resources were extracted from countries to, feed the wealth of traders across the planet. And, a lot of land resources, seeds, all sorts of knowledge and human labor were actually exported out of countries. And it sort of formed the foundation of the WTO and the free trade regime that we have now in the international systems that finance that. Lyngbaek Campesina has a philosophy called food sovereignty, which is that that small-scale farmers and local communities have a right to have control over the resources to be able to provide the food for themselves and their communities and their regions and their countries before exporting to other places, and have those resources to be able to do that. So we do believe that a small amount of trade is probably fine, but the way that it's configured now is absolutely insane. It doesn't serve the interests of providing for a strong local food economy where the bulk of the food is actually going to the people that need it rather than being profited upon by multinational corporations. And really, we believe 80% or so in the UK we think should be being produced here, and 20% may be traded, but there needs to be an overhaul of looking at that trade system so that well-being and climate justice and fair wages, workers' rights, all of those things are at the heart of our trading system. And we need to be bold enough to be able to put tariffs. Countries need to be able to protect their own economies, protect their own farmers' incomes, use tariffs, use trade rules, set standards, and be able to keep those standards. And any free trade regimes that don't allow countries to have that fundamental sovereignty over their right to have their own food protected, they need to be argued against, and we need to completely overhaul our trade system to be able to allow countries to do that. UK right now, we've got a massive fight trying to stop the low standard imports in the trade agreements that are being negotiated now. It's very clear that we don't want the chlorinated chicken, the hormone treated beef, the GM crops and things from other countries where those standards are lower than they are in the UK. And we're really fighting for that fundamental freedom to be able to protect farmers from being undercut with low standard imports.
Thank you, Jyoti. Camila, do you want to add something? Okay. Oh, Diego, I can see.
No, Camila first, please.
No, go Diego, go.
No, just to add something. I think that there are two challenges with trade, because it's one of the key elements that we need to change if we want to promote localization. The first one is governance. As Jyoti mentioned, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and the WTO is not under the United Nations umbrella. It's a private organization. So we cannot talk about sovereignty when a private organization is ruling the trade of this world. That is the first problem, the governance. And the second one is common sense, because it's not only about free trade or no free trade, it's about conditions to trade. So we are talking about climate change and the Paris Agreement. So if we agree on that, we should talk about the carbon footprint of products. And if we add the price of carbon footprint of every product, probably it's going to be more expensive bringing products from the other part of the world to my local place. So that is good for localization. And also it's common sense to talk about the social footprint. And probably when you are trading with your local people, you are going to build human relations, and the social footprint probably is going to be much better, because you will know the employers of the business, the local business, because probably they are your family, your friends, and everything. The social footprint is going to be much better. So governance and common sense, talking about carbon footprint and social footprint.
Yeah. May I say something?
Absolutely.
Yes, I think this is a very core and structural important debate we are having here. But I would also strengthen the importance of us to look of how 20 years ago, when the big movement against globalization was launched, we had a very clear perspective that we had the World Social Forum that is going to turn 20 years since its first edition in next January. But the idea was to reject globalization, and now neoliberal globalization. And now we live in this wildly globalized world where the COVID, the post-COVID economy and world that we are moving towards, it's forcing us to retreat and to relocalize. The danger I see is that in this process, our good intentions be hijacked. For instance, when you say about the role of, use tariffs and standards and protect local economies from all the commodities, and I can talk this very well because I know how, for example, Brazilian exports of GMO soy and beef that comes from the deforestation, et cetera, is damaging local economies. But we have to look that within of what is being cooked, toward this global climate regime, people are designing a system to make trade work for climate change. And one of the main mechanisms is the so-called carbon border adjustment mechanism that will kind of equate. If you, for instance, produce something that has a higher footprint outside your country, you have to equalize for it so it will be able to be imported. The point is that the very system has also designed or is in the merge of establishing a global carbon market. So, and this is another debate, how careful we need to be with the kind of wording that says carbon net neutrality or decarbonization efforts, because many times they are thinking in corporate, you can say that Unilever just announced that it's going to have carbon footprint on every of its products, that they can be competitive. So if peasants do not measure their carbon account for what they are trying to circulate, there will not be acceptable commodities. So we are entering in this brave new world where it's tricky. It's difficult to step in, being sure that we are really fighting for nature, or if we are dangerously entering in a no return path towards commodifying nature and financialize nature even further.
So I want to add something here, because a couple of years ago, I heard for the first time, and that was from you, Camila, about global trade, the emissions from global trade, be it maritime and air, that all those goods and that were being transported around the world were not accounted for anywhere. And you said then, as you say now, they are nobody's emission, and as you also said today earlier in the program, you were saying that the climate agenda is subject to global trade. Nothing is allowed to interfere with global trade. So the danger is here, as you're outlining, that we get derailed by this carbon accounting agenda, and which can be used as another way of marginalizing in a in a new language small farmers that can't have to compete on these silly terms. And I think that going back to what Diego was saying about common sense, but common sense is that you produce for your own needs first, and then for a regional, and then national, and if you've got something left over, then you exchange. This is what we have done through human history, but not the other way around, that you produce for export first without supplying and looking for your own basic needs.
And yet David Ricardo said exactly the opposite, which is specialize in one thing and import everything. And that's how most communities have built their economies for the last 200 years. So that's how radical what you're suggesting, Anja, is.
Yes, but that's also, as we know, built on a myth of a level playing field that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I would say more, I would say more that we also have to discuss how in this globalized world and globalized culture that have been sold to us, that we have global diets. And next year we will have this international food summit, food system summit that is being played. And one thing that is not questioned, it's how we have this globalized diet that is absolutely unsustainable, and that we have like this human right to eat chicken nuggets, and nobody questions how this chicken, actually it's another form of the GMO soy that is being transformed and sold around the world, and it's absolutely unsustainable. So we need to question a lot if we really want to go to a through localization program, and not only buy a package that will be sold to us as a localized, that can be like maybe worse than what we're living now.
I think one of the important things, oh, sorry.
No, Jyoti, go ahead.
I think one of the important things to think about in terms of food, at least, and when you think about specialization, is that if you specialize in producing one type of product, of agricultural product, that has an impact on what sort of farming system you use. And the sort of farming systems that are built on specialization are often monocultures, and they're not, you know, using the tremendous resource we've got globally of agro-diversity and the knowledge and capability of agroecological systems, which are very mixed. And you know, when you've got an agriculture that's working with the with the landscape that's around you and keeping, you know, maintaining traditional ways of farming or landscape values or traditional foods, they're always based on diversity, and they change throughout the seasons. And so when you specialize, you're forcing a very different agricultural model that has had a tremendous impact on the environment. You know, you're forcing a system where there's often more pesticides and herbicides used. You use seeds that all ripen at the same time so they can be exported across the globe or whatever it is. And you often have migrant laborers that can all come in and pick at the same time, rather than being you know, labor that's varied throughout the season, that's embedded in local communities. So it has a very different impact on the environment and our local food cultures when we specialize, rather than thinking about, you know, having diverse local food systems in place. You know, it all feeds into each other. And also being able to recycle the things on the farm. You know, if you want to use natural manure or green manures to be able to fertilize rather than nitrate fertilizers, which have a massive impact on the climate, you know, in terms of nitrous oxide or whatever it is, then you need to have a mixed farming system, which means you recycle and you move things around the farm. And all of these things, they have an impact on many, many different levels. When you change one thing that was embedded and grown over time, you know, somewhere else in the system, it causes a lot of problems. You know, we have such an intricate web that we've survived on for so many centuries. And, you know, yeah.
Thank you, Jyoti. I think we'll take some more questions. Laura, what have you got for us?
I also just want to quickly say to the latecomers that questions, if you can put them in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of the screen rather than the chat box, they'll be answered from there. But I have two questions that are slightly linked and linked to what you were talking about before, so I'm going to read them out together. So one is from Jessica. It says, Camila referenced skepticism about how the economic response to the pandemic is being skewed towards very corporate interests. How do we effectively disrupt this power monopoly, which is so embedded in our democratic systems? How do we protect democracy while having ecologically and equitable values? The Landworkers Alliance and several other panelists seem to have insights. And then another question that I thought I could read out at the same time that could be linked to that is from Michelle, who says, in the African region, we are inundated with impositions from globalized interest, Bill Gates food programs, seed model laws, climate smart agriculture presenting huge obstacles for localizing food systems. What are your thoughts exposing and rejecting these globalized interests?
Who wants to go first? I think everybody wants to say something here. Anyone? No? No?
I don't know. Yeah, disruption. Yeah, it's a hard job. How do we disrupt? I mean, it is really overwhelming, you know, like the amount of power these big transnational corporations have, the lobbying, you know, the way they speak with these silver tongues when they're, you know, in front of government, you know, about how the jobs that are created and economic regeneration and make really dangerous things look really good. Well, they're at the table able to spin all these arguments all the time. And I think one of the most important things we're trying with the Landworkers Alliance is to be at the table, make sure we're actually there. And the same with La Via Campesina, you know, making sure we're part of the FAO processes, making sure that we're part of all the different global things that are going on, and there to try and counteract with truth, you know, some of the lies that are spun by these multinational corporations who are there after profit. But the thing is, when these companies have so much money and they've got so much political power, and with political, you know, with money you can buy seats at the table so easily, it is a really difficult thing. But one thing you always have to remember is that there are more people that stand to benefit from a localized food economy, from a better world, you know, from all of these things. And people have to just maintain the belief that you can make a difference by coming together as social movements. And if you come together as a social movement, then you become more powerful, and then you can eventually find the way through the multiplicity of skills that are involved in a movement to actually change things. But you just have to keep it up, and you have to keep it up, and you have to keep it up, and not be put down every time you see things going in the wrong direction, and keep sounding the alarm as much as possible.
If I could build on what Jyoti has said, I think that our movement is about a different kind of set of global relationships, and it's incumbent on all of us to do two things. One is to create at a community level as diverse and self-reliant an economy as possible, using as much as possible renewable resources. But it's also incumbent on us to share everything we've learned with every other community. And that is the connectedness that we need to have. And so globalization, the way we're defining it, is not dependent trade relations. It's the sharing of ideas and technology and aesthetics and love, and trying to put that all together as a global movement. And I see the way that we defeat bigger players is that we withdraw our support. We stop engaging with them as consumers. We stop engaging with them as investors. We stop subsidizing them, and they will collapse on their own weight.
Camila, do you have something you want to add?
Yes, I think actually this question, how we disrupt and how we challenge those interests, is like at the core of what a real emancipatory localization and a truly transformative social ecological transformation at local level would be. Because then we have to face the very difficult task of thinking how we can promote self-reliance and challenge the technological or the technocratic system where we are totally embedded in. I keep saying that we are now, make believe this is a cell phone, no, that smartphone, that we are phono sapiens, that smartphones have become our limbs. They are an extension of our bodies, an extension of our consciousness. And this technology, it's not neutral, you know, it's a myth. It's a creation of a military industrial complex, and actually it's not a world-wide web. It has an address. It began in the United States, and we all know and share the power that the Silicon Valley, I call it the Californistan, you know, as the 5th largest economy has. So I'm very skeptical, because I see and more driven by the COVID responses from the nation states, that we are working towards a kind of sanitary leviathan, where this dystopic vision of a surveillance capitalism, it's becoming more and more real every day. You know, it's becoming the new normal. And one of the questions that for me, you know, all this debate about algorithm governance and artificial intelligence, the telehealth, the distance learning, this is all becoming very fast, you know, the normal everywhere. So, but one thing that worries me the most, and maybe Michael can help us to think through, is all this talk about the future of money, that we are on the verge of, you know, disrupting and eroding nation-state sovereignty over currency, and we're walking towards privatized kinds of money. There's this big talk about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, but then we have to see who are the players. You know, I see Facebook, I see, you know, all the big techs launching their own currencies, and we know how trade, actually it's e-trade. Trade has migrated to digital platforms. So I think those are the big, hard questions that we really need to face and deepen as the localization movement.
Diego, do you want to add something?
Yeah, maybe only to remark something that I think Jessica said in the question, talking about democracy. So I think that in the post-COVID world, we are probably going to promote the worst phase of globalization, of being in a global war. That is, free trade is going to be there for the next months for sure, but we are going to lose the best part of living in a global world, because now populism, nationalism, and hating each other is being really, really fit by everyone. And that is really something I'm really worried about, that we are in the advantages and disadvantages of a global war. We are promoting more the disadvantages and forgetting about the good things of being in a global war. That is that today we are connected in this conversation with more than hundreds of people, and we can have solidarity with each other. So there are many good things of being in a global war, but now in the post-COVID time, we are forgetting about that, and we are just keeping probably the bad things of globalization and forgetting about the good things of being in a global world.
I can see, Jyoti, you want to say something? And then I think we'll move on afterwards to another question.
I was just nodding along, saying yes.
Oh, you were just nodding along. Yeah, I'm taking these little signs as, well, then I'll say something. Because there was also a question from Africa about, I didn't get it all, but I did get the thing about smart agriculture undermining food sovereignty and small farmers. And this is also something actually Camila has talked a lot about before, not on this webinar, but I think by that you the ones that put the question are talking about the robotization, right, of agriculture. And of course, this is not just in agriculture, it's in many fields, and it's part of this pushing the limit. How can we make more money? You know, the downward spiral of competition and global competition. So this is jobless growth. And in my own country here in Denmark, people are blindly excited about this whole new field, not a whole new field, but it's becoming in a bigger field of how the Danes think they can have an edge on the global market by creating all these robots, totally oblivious to the fact that they are creating, you know, poverty somewhere else in the world. Maybe we'll have an edge for a few years, but we are cutting off the branch we're sitting on, and we are handing over power to bigger corporations, you know. So I think that's like a huge thing that we all have to be really aware of, and we have to speak up against it, because it's kind of coming in, at least here in Denmark, very silently all the time in the news. Isn't it exciting how we are so cutting edge about undermining other people's economies? Of course, that's not the way it's put, but that is what's happening with the smart agriculture, which is only smart for the big corporations. Laura, have you got more for us?
I do indeed. One that's come in is, how do we create the equivalent of the old system's rewards, like money, power, fame, in a new, sustainable, local, and yet international way?
Anyone?
Well, I'll just say one thing about money, since Camila raised the issue of cryptocurrencies. And maybe we can even generalize this about other forms of technology. If you don't understand a technology, if you don't really understand who's doing it, who's making money from it, what its impacts are, you really should be very wary of using it. And that's my concern about cryptocurrencies. Lots of smart people don't know who runs a given system, who's profiting from it, and how it's going to be used. And I think any money systems we design have to be very much rooted in an understandable practice at the local level. I think there are lots of interesting models for local currency. The regional currencies, they need to continue. We're still trying to get it right. But trying to do it on platforms that we control as communities is going to be very important.
Anyone else wants to add something?
I think with
Laura.
all of these,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I just think with all of those concepts, you know, people always wanted enough, abundance and resource and, you know, that kind of thing, even within small traditional communities, you know, but it was within a more sort of convivial context. You know, people want enough of things. You want something to be able to trade, go to a local market and swap loads of things. You know, that's fantastic. Or buy, sell, and trade. That's all great on a local level. Or, you know, within a community, you might have the elders who have more power, or, you know, in certain ways, and the people who save seeds that have their own sort of power, or the people who, you know, do various tasks within a local community that have a power that's built on what they actually do that generates wealth for the people within that community in terms of a better well-being. And so it's just thinking about these things in different terms. And if you can bring it down to a local level where it's between people with fair relationships between each other and people being able to communicate on a more human scale level, then all these concepts can be scaled back to something that we can bring back to home to be healthy and good.
Thank you. I think we'll take some more questions. There are about 52 of them. I'm afraid we're not going to make them all today, but there is a webinar later on.
So we have one from Freya in Portugal. Is it ever going to be possible to create a vibrant local economy with a financial system that controls the creation of money based on debt and interest? Do we need a fundamental reform of the financial system at root?
So I'm sure lots of us want to answer that, and I also want to say something, and I totally agree with you from Portugal. We do need that, a total overhaul of the financial system. There is no way we can create strong local economies without also looking at who's printing the money, who's got the control, and positive money, for example, is a movement that is spreading all over the world, looking at just that. But Camila, are you wanting to say something? No, Michael?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's starting with a local bank or credit union or an interest-free bank, if that's your passion. It's starting with mutual networks where you're providing credit to one another. It's starting with circles of local businesses like the Veer in Switzerland. I think there's lots of great models there for localizing finance, but what I feel like is particularly important in developed countries, so-called developed countries, I use that word advisedly, is that most of the money is not in the banking sector. Most of the money is in stocks, bonds, pension funds, mutual funds, insurance funds, and these things are incredibly globalized. And people, unfortunately, the laws of many countries pretty much dictate that you must put your money into these kinds of entities which invest exclusively in corporations. And so we really have to take apart these financial systems and the securities and banking laws that undergird them and reconstruct them around local finance. We have to, you know, like I showed in my little excerpt from Bristol, that in Nova Scotia, the province gave permission to the grassroots to start creating local pension funds. And there's 60 of them now, focused on things like local food or local energy. That's the kind of thing we need to do to break apart this financial monopoly out there.
Yes,
Diego.
Maybe to add something to this, because I don't have the answer or the roadmap to do what, for example, Michael is suggesting. It's clear that we need to transform the financial system. I don't know how, but what is clear is that every day we are losing sovereignty and power as citizens, because even money creation, even central banks in every country or in the European Union, for example, central banks are losing power, and now power is shifting again to multinationals and people with money, and it's not and their citizens. So we have that challenge, maybe to make people aware about how important it is to print your own money, because otherwise they are printing money. It seems that printing money is the solution for everything, but each time that someone is printing money, the money that you have in your pocket has less value. So it's something we need to understand too. And we are creating debt. And when we are creating debt, the debt is paid by us, by citizens, finally, because it's part of the budget of our governments. So, but that is maybe too sophisticated to be understood. And hopefully we can support organizations, as you mentioned, Positive Money and others that are pushing for money sovereignty and their citizens' power, because otherwise all the other discussions about localization and growing our own food and whatever, maybe they are not going to be enough if we don't change that the power of creating money and managing the finances of the world.
I'd like to say regarding to this, how do we change the financial system? That I think the most distinctive trace of our super highly financialized stage of global capitalism that we live today, it was made possible through the digitalization, through digital technologies. Because if we didn't have, those are the arteries where the blood of the financial system runs, because otherwise we would not have algorithm trade. The level, the speed of how this abstract and fake money is created is dependent on those channels. So what I think we need to dedicate ourselves to think, it's how this financialization of the economy has permeated every corner of our daily lives. We have a financialized imagination. We have more and more the capacity to create new language, for instance, and to talk about nature as a pack of services, environmental services. We have assets, for instance, as carbon credits that we can trade. This is all something that is created first in human imagination. And then we start to see modern nature as this provider of credits for us. So in this note, something that I'm following from a distance, but kind of worries me, is how strong is this talk about invest in communities. I'm worried that we will start to accept corporate sponsorship for the communities, because all those, this financial capital also, of course, wants to be partnering, as before they were with nation states and the public-private partnership. Now it's moving a step further, is public-private community partnership. And this, if you look at the local level, can become very, very complicated, because debt, it's not a privilege of the capitalism, the modern world system. Debt is a phenomenon that has been going on for at least 5,000 years. There is this great book by David Graeber, who was it's an economic anthropologist, that is very important figure in the Occupy movement. And I think we need to go back and to look how those major engines that make our globalized world turn around could be actually in fact disrupted, and not only repurposed or kind of refashioned to serve to a higher level of accumulation. I don't know what others think,
Yeah, I think we've got a lot more questions. I don't know if there are lots to add here. I want to add a little something that I read, I think a year or two ago, a survey that was made actually in the UK with UK MPs in the UK that were asked about who has the power to make money, print money in the UK, and well, of course, print but make money, and 8 out of 10 politicians on both from the left to the right spectrum thought that it was the national bank or the in the UK, and the same thing is true in many other parts of the European, or in the European Union. So it's very, very common that also politicians in power believe that it's nation states that have the power to make money, when in actual fact, our governments across the world have to go out and borrow money from private banks and pay interest to private banks that make money when they make a loan. And then when they fail, the government, our taxpayers' money are used to bail them out. It's an insane system. So I think it does have to be right as part of the things that we have to work on in the localization room, or anyone that wants to transform this insane economy, we have to think about that.
Okay, ready for another question? We've
Yes.
got one, yeah. How do we productively engage with and disentangle people within our close networks, family members, neighbors, etc., who are very committed to the current system and believe strongly in it, and who easily dismiss many of the ideas we're discussing here?
Anyone? Michael, you look like you got a comment on your lips.
Well, I mean, it's a dance, isn't it? And I mean, I think we've got to be persistent. We've got to be good humored about it. We've got to, call truth to power. And we've got to make demonstration projects of an alternative reality. One of the things that I love, Anja, about the big picture, 4-hour picture that you put forward today, is that there's all kinds of beautiful examples in there. And the more that we can surface those examples that give life to the old Maggie Thatcher theme, there is no alternative, I think the more power we gain.
May I add something? Yeah, I think what I would say is, don't try to advise them or to tell them what to do. Just try to be the happier in your group, being local, buying local, recycling your clothes, or getting sustainable fashion, and show them that is amazing, that is really cool, that is nice. Because sometimes we are trying to say, hey, you should do this because otherwise, the global market or whatever, the free trade, don't do that. Just be a good example. As Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. I would say, be the economy you want to see in the world, and be happy, and show them that it's really good. And yeah, that's it.
Should we take another question, Laura?
Yeah, Vera from Brighton has just wrote a really good question. What advice would you give to a young person entering adulthood facing a triple threat of climate chaos, disappearing high streets, and a post-COVID recession? It feels the political and economic institutions will be difficult to reform, but a young generation with no jobs and all the imagination strikes me as a force to reckon with.
Well, that gives me a lot of hope. I feel the same. Who would like to speak to this?
I've got 4 teenage daughters. Maybe I should.
Jyoti, you are the woman.
Yes.
No, I love teens. I love teens these days. I'm endlessly inspired about the knowledge that they've got. It's that beautiful mix of having that global perspective, because they've had that, connections like we've got here, speaking to people all around the world. But also at the same time, I suppose my girls grew up on the land with me, and it was beautiful because they picked vegetables and ate them fresh with us. And we've had a nice home cook. We just had our roast dinner, all grown from the farm, and homemade cheese and things like that. And I love how this generation can combine these new ideas with a freshness. But what we've got to give them is the tools to keep dealing with all these crises. It's not just COVID crisis. These crises are going to just keep coming and coming and coming at them all through the next generation. And whatever knowledge we can give them about building social movements and how to work together and to face these things with a little bit of awareness that they have some power to keep moving towards something better in the world, you know, that's what we've got to do. But I think, you know, that it's difficult now because this generation hasn't had as much chance to be connected to the land. So much of the food has come from supermarkets, and without them having to produce it, you know, or be in contact with people with the knowledge and skills that knew how to work the land in a very intricate way. And that was the generation before that perhaps had those skills. And we need to share that intergenerational knowledge, do whatever we can to bring, you know, this right generation full of passion and energy and technological and, you know, scientific knowledge that we've never had, in connection with the land, and realize that we can have a future that's not just built on global corporatization. That's not modernization anymore. That's actually quite old school. You know, the future is actually local, and that's something, if they understand their natural environment, they can apply all that amazing passion that they've got to the local land around them, and then we've got a really bright future ahead of us.
Anyone else wants to add something?
Yeah, I think that what Jyoti made is an absolutely fundamental point, and I also agree that is the way forward. But then we have to combine this with the struggle for truly massive land reform, because if we really foresee people going back to the land, we have to acknowledge that land was transformed in a commodity, and this was a process, a historical process that started in Europe, but that was spread all around the world. We invented land markets, and today Brazil, for instance, is a place where we have the highest land concentration in the world. So we could not move forward this agenda of relocalizing and taking youth to reconnect with nature, and to develop different alternative kinds of living if we don't combine this with a truly global campaign and struggle for massive land reform.
Thank you, Camila. Should we take another question?
Yeah, I've got one here that is, what does local mean in the global north? Global north is global north based on the exploitative economy it managed to build its current society over. Does localization mean sustaining the current society, or does it mean it's a suggestion to regress materially? Is material regression even a possibility in the global north?
Anyone? Maybe I'll say something. I don't see it as regression, actually. I see it as living within our means. And I see it as a model that can be much richer, not in materialistic things, but in relationships, with a connection with the land, in being in tune with ourselves, and looking out for everybody and not looking out for number one, as Margaret Thatcher used to say. And so I think by going back to what I was saying earlier, producing for ourselves first, and then going outwards in bigger circles and letting other people do the same, will help us to create a fairer, more equitable world, not just here, wherever we are, but also in other places. Because what the current system is doing is demanding that people around the world produce a lot of non-essential goods for a market in the global north. So by localizing our own economies, not just our food economies, we are actually also helping other people in other parts of the world, so they can produce for themselves and don't have to give up all their resources for some huge middleman to make a lot of profit on it, which was going back to that land grabbing, for example, in Africa or in Eastern Europe and so forth. You know?
And I also think we should remember to challenge constantly in our minds this very deep myth of progress, you know, that we have one story of humankind and that we walk from one point towards its evolutionary end. This is what has allowed us to call some countries developed and others developing and others underdeveloped. You know, who said that? According to what standards? Who decided? I find it much more inspirational to think, as Helena Norbert Hodge suggests, is, no, let's talk about ancient futures. Why we cannot rewire our minds towards thinking of a circular time that we have now to, like we talk about circular economy, why not a circular time where we now have made full circle? We need to go back, which is not back, it's just to return to the point of relearning and reconnecting with the land.
Thank you. Thank you, Camila. Laura?
Yeah, I've got another one that's just come in. How does one influence the government to think locally, especially if the ideologies are not aligned to think so?
Wow, I think we got some strong panelists that can speak to this. Who wants to go first? Diego.
I think the question is tricky because it's difficult to talk to a government. You know, what is to talk to a government? There are different ways to try to influence a government. But it's true that you mentioned also ideologies, and that is one of the challenges that we have. We are fighting with each other based on ideologies that were created more than 200 years ago. So probably if today in the conversation, Adam Smith or Marx or Keynes would be here, they were bringing different ideas that the ideas that they created really many years ago. But governments are based on that kind of idea. So to influence them and to try to promote a localization agenda with them, I am seeing in many countries that municipalism is growing a lot. So again, with example of a lot of local communities and not only small communities, but big cities, but at the local level, they are really doing amazing things with the localization agenda. And they are creating really communities where people can really enjoy life, and I think maybe empowering local governments for me would be the first step, more than maybe wasting time trying to convince national governments that are more busy in other kind of things. So empowering local governments, I think, and municipalism would be a nice way to start.
And I think one way of empowering local governments is convincing the national governments that we can make your life easier if you surrender some power and responsibility to the lower levels and just let us experiment, and you worry about the things that are only needed to be dealt with at the top level. And that opens up things, I think.
Anyone else? Jyoti?
I think it's interesting because I do a lot of lobbying and campaigning, and here in the UK at the moment, we're debating a lot about our agriculture bill, and I spend a lot of time talking to our conservative government, which is maybe a little more right wing, or talking to people right now in the House of Lords, which is like a very old institution, and one thing I notice is that when you talk about local and about food and the environment around you and tradition and culture, it's actually something that often speaks across party lines. And it's, and right now we're actually getting quite a lot of traction, from people, say, in the Labour Party, who is more like sort of, leftist, I suppose, because we're supporting local economic activity, and workers' rights and that kind of thing. But also with the Conservative Party, for people who care about traditional food and, the countryside and the way things used to be. And, there's actually really a split within that party, where there's some who are very keen on promoting, global trade economies and, that kind of thing. But there's also many people who really do understand what they used to know about what their country used to be like, or, have a lot of sympathy for that sort of thing. So there's different ways when you're talking about food and local food that you can actually approach that, because it's a very universal thing. Everybody eats. And people can really understand what's around them and what they can see, or remember what it was like for them when they were growing up, if they're very old, or, that kind of thing. So there's different ways we can approach this, that it doesn't need to be a partisan issue. It doesn't need to be left or right or old or new, or, you know, anything that we can think about. You know, what is it that would appeal to you about understanding what's fantastic about this, you know, organic meal in front of you that was produced from the farmers down the road, you know, and approach it in that way, you know, and the language that you use when you talk to different people can bring people on board, because what we're about is creating community around this. It's not about saying you've got this value and it's really wrong, you know, and bringing people on board by making it something that's accessible for everybody to understand the joy and the beauty of.
Camila, do you want to add anything?
Oh, yes, I would like to add that in Brazil, this is quite a different situation, because we are like drowning in deforestation and soy monoculture, GMOs, glyphosate, you know, and agribusiness class, the one that is not killing indigenous people and poisoning water wells. And, you know, it's frontier capitalism. It's land grabbing, extreme land grabbing. And there are highly international corporations that are profiting out of it, because the big seed and agrochemical complexes are there. The big international agricultural machinery is there, John Deere, New Holland, but also with this coupling of digital agriculture, climate smart agriculture that is coming our way. It's one more layer of surveillance of, you know, big tech coming very wildly into the territories, into community living. And it's not something that you can actually sit and discuss in government, because they have bought the government. They are running the government. You know, they have taken on the state to maneuver and to push forward their agenda. So the political challenge that we have, especially in Latin America, where the southern cone of Latin America, the big soy field of the world, monoculture, it's not so romantic. You know, we are that people are dying in the front lines of this dispute.
I think just before we go into the next question, I just want to add here. So, yeah, you are talking about the burning in Brazil and being on the front line, and it's like, as someone, I'm a local food activist and have been for many years. A part of my work here is also resisting, for example, the Danish agribusiness that are, for example, driving that kind of so-called development in Brazil. So in Denmark, we are 5 million people, a bit more. We produce 30 million pigs with imported fodder from Brazil, a lot of it from the Amazon. And then we export those 30 million pigs mostly to China. So this is a very neat little example of a mad economy and a totally non-common sense agriculture economy as well. So if we want to give you back the right to grow your own food and try to do what we can to stop those huge agribusinesses, then like in Denmark, that's what we also need to work on, dismantling the agribusiness back home. Laura, we are lagging towards the end, but
okay,
we can probably take a couple more questions.
A couple more? Okay. So we've got a couple short ones that I will put together for you. So there was one from Jasmine on how do you suggest we recommon the commons? She adds, I've always wondered how we've got to the point where we pay for water. And Alan has added and said, how can we have globalization of awareness of what is happening in Brazil that will affect all the world in a very bad way?
So, how did we end up paying for water? No?
We've ended up paying for pretty much everything that used to be commons. So it kind of goes along with the, you know, the capture of resources for people to be able to make money. That should be the global commons for everybody to be able to benefit from. Yeah, it's all that process. I think, you know, understanding basic fundamental rights. I think an important thing that happened on the international level was the Declaration of Peasant Rights, at least with our organization last year, which was, not only recognizing things like the right to food and shelter and all those very important things, but also understanding another layer that for land-based people who are ecosystem dependent, who are dependent on land for their as their source of wealth, protection of those fundamental commons like the right to land, the right to seed, the right to water, the right to all of those things, so that you can provide for your own self-sufficiency, your own food sovereignty, and your own local food economies, was actually a fundamental human right as well. And so, we need to protect the commons on all levels.
Yeah,
and I think that, sorry.
No,
Diego.
just to say, to really raise awareness, and at the same time trying to explain people what is the commons. I think that education is really important here, because people don't know what the commons means in many places. So we should teach that in our schools to everyone, and to understand that the earth or the land and the water and the air is something that doesn't belong to us, belong to everyone, even the future generations. And we need to include that in our education system. Otherwise, it's to be really difficult to raise awareness afterwards about that.
Yeah.
I think
Michael.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I was just going to say that I think part of the education of people about the commons is to make people more aware of indigenous thinking, because indigenous thinkings had a very different view about nature and about what's all around us. And to the extent that, we can let people know that these indigenous cultures and philosophies are still alive, I mean, that's a lot of what drew me to Helena's work initially, is the preservation, the diversity of cultures and how to keep them alive.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would just add that I try not to speak about the commons as something objectified outside ourselves, but to urge us to think as what is commoning. Commoning, I think it's the most important notion, that it's a practice, it's a daily practice that we need to relearn and reclaim for our future.
And I would argue that the best way that we can protect, maintain, and reclaim the commons is through a process of localization, and also empowerment on a local level in terms of political power. I think there's no other way that one can reclaim the commons, really. Should we take the last question? I think people are probably wanting to go. We're going over time here, but with 70 questions left, it's lovely to see this kind of engagement. And I just want to tell everybody that we are recording this. We also recording the chat, and it will be available afterwards. And we at Local Futures will be scrutinizing all these questions, because in the coming months, we will be, for example, creating a community guide to localization and other resources. So this is hugely helpful for us, because you're sharing resources here and also coming with questions that will help us fine-tune the tools that we hopefully can share with all of you at a later stage. I also, just before this last question, I want to say, Laura already mentioned the International Alliance for Localization. You can sign up on the World Localization Day page. There's also a pledge. If anyone wants to pledge and join us, we're aiming for 10,000 actions that will move us toward a more localized world. So you can write down the things that you think you can do. And there's also a declaration, a localization declaration. So if you feel up for it, sign your name there. Laura, should we take a last question?
Okay, I'll do. So there's one from Tawny who asked, do you have any advice on how to balance meaningful activism whilst making a living at the same time?
So can I say what was very important for me. I was in law school when I had this sudden realization that I was about to do some very bad stuff in the world, practicing a normal legal career. And it dawned on me that if I wound up just selling fast food across the street from a law firm, you know, to make the money that I needed so I could volunteer my time to do what I loved, that would be a happier life. So I would say, to the extent it's possible, try to encourage yourself and the people around you to build a life around what you love, and be hopeful. I mean, it's more than hope, but be hopeful that things, you know, come together and you can make a living at it. Because if you make the decision at the top that I'm just going to make a lot of money and someday later I'll find happiness and ethical expression, you're lost.
Anyone else?
Well, like you've been saying, Anja, and everybody else as well, is that, you know, a living, what constitutes a living is very subjective. You know, you can live on smaller amounts of money and have an amazing life. It's what you choose to do with your life. And you know, I went to university and, you know, studied international development and things, and then kind of realized actually I wanted to be a farmer because I visited so many wonderful farmers around the world and indigenous people, and saw that I felt their way of life was something I wanted to do, and had to train myself and learn how to become a farmer with my daughters. And you know, I thought, I don't want them in daycare. I want them with me on the farm, you know, eating good food with me. And we lived on very low incomes in order to do that, because as a small scale farmer, you don't make loads of money, but actually it's the quality of life that's very important. And if you're doing something in your life, you know, it can be a halfway point for a little while or whatever it is. But if you keep a vision in your mind towards what it is you want to be doing, and think about, well, you know, it's a thing about getting enough money, or also lowering, you know, the impact of your lifestyle. And, you know, if you need to do without some foreign holidays and live it, you know, live without electricity sometimes, or, you know, eat split pea soup instead of the fanciest, you know, food that you can get, you can make ends meet and still live a really good quality of life. It's about the vision that you're involved in, and what you do with your life that gives quality to your life. And you can always find a way to make it good and do what's beautiful, because you know, living the life that you want to live can be the best message to the world you can have.
Yeah, just to say that changing the world is not well paid, but is very well rewarded. Just because you will be proud of yourself, others will be proud of you. You will be in peace, calm, and you will sleep really well every night.
And I would say that in our times when even activism is becoming commodified, you know, and where corporations are selling and branding themselves as together with causes, I think that what makes us to go through it's an attitude of not stopping being enchanted by, you know, the wonderful nature that we have and the opportunities, you know, to change history and to make the days as we go by, but taking our lives in our own hands and not expecting, you know, somebody else from outside to solve.
Yeah, and I think
you meet the most beautiful people like all of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think we shouldn't beat up ourselves if we can't find like a good job while being an activist as a job, because I'm sure all of us have had to have a job within this global economy. Most people are in that position, and most of us will be, or many will be in that position, because this is a transition. We're trying to create a transition. So there are many things that we are playing at the same time. I think really, really the important thing is to connect with others and don't feel alone. And so we're sort of suggesting that, you know, connect with others wherever you are, and set up a local hub, you know, to talk about how you can move forward together. Now that gives power, and it's something that can be fun. Don't forget to celebrate so it doesn't become a burden, no? Because you know, we have to live this. This is not like a transition that is going to be fast. So it has to be, I think, a way of life, no? Well, localization is a lifeboat in a time of crisis, but more importantly, it's a long-term strategy for systemic change. And so it's going to take time, and it's going to take all of our time from a lot of people. And a key thing there is what we talk about big picture activism, is to be, you know, we have to use our head, our hearts, our hands, but we certainly also have to use our mouth to get these news stories out, both about what needs to be changed and what can be changed, because there are so many beautiful things going on, and few people get to hear about it. So it's up to us basically to carry that forth and join this choir of people from around the world. So I want to thank all of you for staying with us for so long, and to all of you lovely panelists. I look forward to whenever we meet next in real life. But meanwhile, I think this has been pretty good, and I thank you for your time. And I'll just say to everybody, there's another webinar a little later on, 8 p.m. New York time, if anyone wants a double doses.
You've been working so hard. Thank you for your hard work. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you very much.
All. And thank you, Laura, for...
I love Diego's, be the economy you want to see.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Night, night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers. Okay, Laura, I will leave you.